All right, welcome everyone to this very important fireside chat. My name is Jocelyn Park. I'm the CEO and owner of APLUS Education. Really just honored and privileged to just be here with my friend Joy Acaso, and I will let her introduce herself. But just a little bit about A Plus Education. We are a um, one-stop shop for students in grades 3 through 12, all of their educational needs, everything from academic tutoring to test preparation to college advising to executive functioning and study skills, coaching. Um, yeah, just really focusing on serving the holistic student and academic the academic arena is very important, but as we will kind of delve into tonight, um, everything's very connected. And so tonight's conversation is just going to be just an honest conversation. As you may be aware of, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it is also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, AAPI month. And so there's a lot to unpack actually there. And those two themes resonate deeply with myself. I am Taiwanese American. My parents are first generation immigrants from Taiwan. And my husband is Korean American. So there's a lot of overlap, a lot of AAPI threads there. But without further ado, I will let Joy introduce herself and the incredibly important work that she is doing.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Joyacaso. I am an anxiety support coach and licensed psychotherapist, and I help people reclaim their mental and emotional wellness. I too am of Asian background. I am Filipino. My husband is Filipino. And so I'm excited to just be here and to talk about mental health as well as our beautiful, wonderful heritage, and just kind of like understanding what that looks like, integrating both mental health and the Asian heritage.
Thank you. So yeah, let me just talk a little bit about what we'll be going through tonight. We have a lot to kind of cover, but it is going to be generally an organic conversation. So we'll start with our individual, mine and Joy's mental health walk and kind of our what frames or what has framed our idea and perspective on mental health. Then we'll set the stage and talk about understanding mental health in our children. And then we'll also talk about the role of parents, not just in helping our children understand their, mental health and wellness, but how, as a parent, our perspective of mental health influences, right? Like our parenting, and how we frame mental health awareness in our children and generations to come. Then Joy will provide some practical tools and resources that you can implement in your home to make sure, we are helping our children to cope well with the things that they may be grappling with. And then we'll close with a Q&A session. So just a few things on housekeeping items. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. And we have one of my high school interns, Gurbani, is here, and she's going to be monitoring the chat box. So go ahead and feel free if you have questions prior to the Q&A session, just to drop them in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we answer those. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll get started. So yeah, for me, I guess this whole idea of mental health, it was never tied into physical health, right? Like growing up in an Asian immigrant family, it was always taboo. Like if you felt stressed or if you felt, sad or angry or whatnot, it was more of a, children should be seen but not heard situation. And I think that's a pretty common theme amongst Asian immigrant households. But I just remember clearly, um, whenever my dad would carry, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Whenever my dad came home from work, you could tell, or me and my sister could tell that, on some days he was just like carrying all of this stress, right? And the most obvious sort of marker was the way that he would talk to us. I think as we got older, it was easier to not be like, "Oh my gosh, like how are you?" Things like that. It would just be like, "Yeah, today was, a day." And I, had meetings that were like you could feel it. Like he didn't have to say anything explicit, right? And I think that's pretty common. Um and so when we see those types of, I should say, lack of sort of coping mechanism in our parents, for me, it imprinted upon me like, okay, we should never talk about that. You just kind of accept that life is going to be filled with challenges. Of course, there's, um, amazing memories and times as well. But when you face the challenges, like you just suck it up, right? You suck it up and you just keep moving. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't talk about it. And you just get through it somehow, right? And what I really appreciate now, as an adult, as a mom, just there's a lot of light being shed on mental health. And we live in such a different world now. I think COVID was a really big inflection point, which we will talk about later. um, but just like even us joining here together tonight is just a testament to how far we've come in terms of the narrative and the discourse behind mental health. And I think it's really important to not um, just, you know, overlook the importance of mental health. And um, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but in terms of like our students and in the education space, how that's manifesting. But yeah, Joy, feel free to share kind of a little bit about your own journey in mental health and wellness, and perhaps like what interested you to kind of go down this career path because it's so needed.
Yeah, I had no idea that I would actually end up um, in the mental health field. And I just thought, social work, right? Because I have my master's in social work, that that would be like a good route for me to go back to grad school. Um, and when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but my professor encouraged me to go back to grad school. And so after much research, I was like, oh, I think social work is a good field. And then I took classes on human behavior, which I loved so much, and just studying really myself and why I felt the way I did, or like my behaviors and things like that. And it was just so interesting to me. And I took an internship in a community-based program, and that's where I actually learned more about mental health. I really did not know anything about mental health, emotional health. I was very disconnected from my emotions. I knew that I just wanted to help people, and like I liked asking questions and things like that, but I didn't know the importance of it. And I think that's part of my story too, and part of my work is to really show people that it's okay if you didn't know. You can know now, you can learn now, whatever tools, whatever skills you need in order to, you raise your family, or raise yourself, right? Or improve your relationships and all of those things. Like it's never too late. Um, I think I started to pay attention to my mental health maybe my late 20s. And then I became a mom, and that's when things really started to change for me, and I started to get serious about mental health. my own mental health, which was 16 years ago. So my daughter is now 16, and I have a 10-year-old son as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think there's just so many layers of complexity, right? Because
Yes.
it's like when you become a parent, it's not just you by yourself anymore, right? Like however you view certain things, like that will be passed on to your kids. And so obviously we want to have, a healthy framework of what mental health and wellness looks like so that we can help um, our kids kind of walk through their own respective journeys. And um, so with that said, I know that you are deep into this work. But what are some of the changes that you've seen, in this space, especially since COVID? And even
Yeah.
like when you think back to, when you first got into this space versus where we are now.
Wow.
I'd love to hear some of the changes and some of the things that we're seeing. And I can speak to kind of what I'm seeing manifest in the classroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, with COVID, right, and with the shutdown and things like that, we know statistically that the mental health crisis has come upon us. Speaking for the adolescents and teens and things like that, there's been an increase of feelings of anxiety, and I'm going to use feelings of anxiety because mental health doesn't necessarily mean a disorder,
Mm,
but we just know that there's a spike of
right.
maybe because they're reporting it more, right? Because we're now more informed,
Yeah.
less stigma, but there is still a stigma.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so the self-report, I should say, of feelings of anxiety and then feelings of overwhelming sadness have increased since COVID. Um, and so we find that the shutdown definitely isolated it. The isolation was a lot to take on, not just for kids, but parental stress also spiked during that time. And then when we reopened the world, so to speak, re-entering society was also stressful for both children and adults. So, and that's manifesting in social anxiety as well as performance anxiety in school, which you will probably speak on more, and just relational
Right.
issues as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, okay, so our business existed. It's been in existence for over 25 years. I actually took over my father's business, right? There's a
Yes.
lot of complexity there as well. But when he started the business, it looked so different in terms of where we were in society with education. Um, I think there was more of a homogenous sort of trend, especially within the Asian community, where everyone was taking advanced level classes and everyone was doing well, so to speak. Like just I'm sure there were several who, that type of environment wasn't great for them, but they got through it. But now I think after COVID, like what I've been seeing is like parents are coming in and they're saying, okay, I'm seeing that my kids are, they used to get A's in math, but now they're getting
Mhm.
like C's and D's, right? And that's like, I always tell them that's a symptom because when I dig deeper, when I get to know the student more, or when I get to talk to the parent more, there's a lot of things that I'm paying attention to, right? And one of the things is, yes, the isolation, right? Like, are they engaged with their peers? Are they able to engage in conversations comfortably with adults? That's one thing that I've seen that's really difficult for this next generation. Um,
Yeah.
they feel much more comfortable on their devices, right? And it's just that's why it's so important that when we view a child, we're not just um and like education, right? We're not just giving them like academic tutoring or which is again like all needed and great things, but a lot of times it points to a deeper issue, right? Like the root. I always say that it's kind of a band-aid. Like sure, for now you may be able to improve your grade a little bit, right? To get from a C back to a B or an A.
Mhm.
But then when we look at the long-term repercussions, if we're not really getting to the root, which could be linked to the mental state of the student, then those types of challenges are going to surface again. And who knows like when that will happen, right? And it could be, high school, it could be college. And in college, it's like you have so much more freedom and nobody's really chasing you down, but at the same time, the converse could happen, like, you could be even more isolated, right? And if you go to away to school in a different state or a different location, and you never had that opportunity to build a community around you, then that can feel incredibly isolating, and we are seeing,
Sure.
an increase in students failing out of college or even, suicidal ideation or suicide, right? Acts of
Yep.
suicide. And it's just so heartbreaking. And for me, as someone who wants to, and for you too, wants to champion the next generation, whether that's our roles as moms or in the fields that we're in, it's just
Yep.
like we all need to come together to support this next generation. It's no longer like all on teachers or all on administrators. Like it really needs to be, I said this before, just an all hands on deck situation where
I love
we
that.
have, practitioners, we have teachers, educators, coaches, mentors, just all surrounding them to support them and to champion them. Because again, if we're wanting them to be successful in whichever way, like they need all of us to really invest our time and our resources into them. And I tell parents, if we think about right now where we are, right? Like if we don't resolve these challenges or have honest, uncomfortable, most of the time uncomfortable conversations with ourselves, with our children, 5 to 10 years down the line, like where will that bring us as, a country, right? Like in the global
Yes.
workforce. If we're just talking about, um, will our the next generation of leaders, of change makers, like are they going to be able to thrive in this world, right? And so that's why I'm like, everything is connected. Like we need to not just um, resolve one piece of the puzzle. Like we need to really consider um, the whole child, the whole student. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that in the Western, right, culture, we
Yeah.
are so fragmented. Like, the academics is only academics, and then the same with mental health is only mental health. But what I learned from social work is one of those things that I appreciate is the person and environment, which means that we take a look at what's going on at home, what's going on in school. Um, and it's a process, right? But we do have to be patient, and transformation doesn't happen overnight. So even if we have to keep going back to that question of like, okay, tell me again what's going on at home, right? A lot of the times it doesn't come out in just one sitting.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's why I think when I'm talking to the parents that I serve, which a lot of them are in the Asian diaspora, whether that's first generation immigrants or those who grew up here, like myself, then um, it's like there's a lot of nuances and a lot of cultural, I don't want to say barriers, but things to consider when we're talking about mental health. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have to like be cautious a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of like what I say, right? Because I don't want to like overstep a boundary or I'm not like a licensed mental health professional. But at the same time, I'm like, you and I want the same things for your child, right? Like, I want your child to feel supported. I want your child to feel safe and vulnerable. And I would be able to support them with their academics and all of that, but you might need to seek out some more support in terms of this mental health piece. And I've been having
Absolutely.
more and more of these conversations in recent years, and I'm totally like convinced it's because of what's been happening, with COVID, and just we're still seeing things manifest now, right? Um, that COVID was like what, like 4 years ago now, right? And so
Yes,
it's just
and
like these things, to your point, they take time. Symptoms will take time to present themselves, and it is our responsibility to kind of figure out at least what are some things that we can be doing, right, to help our children when they do present
absolutely.
themselves. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And to just tie it back to the Asian heritage, or even, people of color in general, it's very, like, mental health is very different. So we call it a culturally responsive type of help,
Right.
right, in terms of mental health, because there's so
Yeah.
many factors that come into play. We come from a collective society, so our thoughts aren't just our thoughts. We carry our parents' thoughts and their parents' thoughts. So um, we can't just say, oh, well, you just need to stop being depressed, or you just stop feeling anxious, because in a collective community, we really do consider what other people, we just have to also factor that in,
Mm,
that we consider what other people are thinking, what our parents,
yeah.
expect of us. But that can all, and those are okay, that can all be brought into, the process,
Mhm.
and be explored. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before, but like, it's not a novel idea, but when we talk about taking care of our kids or our families or, our friends, it's like, I think now society is like saying, okay, like for moms, it's okay to take care of ourselves first. And we should. But growing up, I never saw my mom engage in like any type of
Mm,
self-care. It was like grinding, 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 cleaning, cooking, laundry, like all of those things, like all the time. And she was the backbone and still is of our family. And I appreciate everything, right, that she's done and sacrificed. But at the same time, I'm like, that's really exhausting, and now I think, both me and my sister are grown, we have our own kids, it's like, she's now just kind of taking care of her health, right? Like, her body, physical health, but also mental health, and so, I guess, can you share with, some of our, audience members just some things that we as parents or as guardians can be doing every day just to like make sure that we take note of our mental health
yes.
right before we put on our oxygen mask before we put on anybody else's oxygen mask. And like you said, we just carry so much, and a lot of these things, these expectations or whatnot, it kind of comes out through like physically as well, right? Like pain or like aches, or and we obviously don't want to get to that point. So like, what are some things that we can take note of where it's like, okay, I feel like I'm starting to slip, or like
Oh,
something's
I like
going
that.
on where like, something's not right and I need to do something now before I get to the point where I'm kind of in crisis mode, right? Because there are people depending on me. And I want to make sure that I can be there for them, I can support them. So let me take care of myself first.
Yes. No, I like that. I think that's a key word too. Like when we start to say something doesn't feel
Mm,
right, right? That could be a signal. Um, I feel off. I feel stuck. Like those are some words that we could be looking at. as well, or I feel like I'm just going through the motions is another one. And that is a sign that we need to just kind of pause, not a sign to panic. It's not a sign, to be
Yeah.
alarmed, right? Or I think there's also that extreme of like, is there something wrong with me mentality? It's just a signal that's coming, from your body, from your mind that we shouldn't ignore, first of all, and to just kind of see, what kinds of pains or aches you're feeling um, at the moment, because that really is a good signal from the body.
Mm,
Um, Knowing our limits,
right.
knowing when we feel tired or exhausted, right, and things like that, could also kind of give us a clue that, okay, maybe I need to kind of pause and take inventory of my own emotions. Other signs could be like increased irritability,
Yeah.
like where everything sets me off. Like when we start to say these things, it's like, it's good to consider.
Yeah.
Um,
And then a lot of
yeah.
times we like project that to our kids, right? It's like, oh my gosh, why was I so short with, my
Yes.
daughter when in normal circumstances that wouldn't have happened, right? The fuse is definitely much shorter if I'm, triggered or if I'm like already like angry or irritated, like you said. And then it's like a lot of times our kids kind of end up being, or our spouses end up being the ones who are at the other end of that, the receiving end of that. And um, yeah, so no, I totally agree. I think
Yeah.
you were about to say some other things, but that just really brought to mind, like, who's on the receiving end of that irritability? A lot of times it's
Absolutely.
our loved ones, right? Like
Yes.
we would not act out like that to our bosses or like, at work,
Yeah.
right? It's like, it's with people that we're familiar with. And that brings me back to my childhood, right? Like I was on the receiving end of that a lot of times. And yeah, and just like understanding like, okay, I need to be aware, right? Because if we don't know what we don't know, then the patterns just keep happening, right? Um, so yeah.
Yes. No, absolutely. And we can definitely, that we know from studies that um, our stress can get passed down
Mm,
to our children in utero. So like they said that like according to research, by the third trimester, the stress response and the trauma actually passes down to the children through the placenta.
mm,
Which, by the way, I didn't know this when I first became a parent. Had
yeah,
I known, maybe a lot of things would have changed. But yeah, and when I gave birth to our daughter, I did experience some postpartum anxiety, which is the irritability.
yeah,
You know, a lot of the irritability mostly, and then just feeling like I didn't understand what I was doing and things like that. So I know that some of those anxiety passed down,
uh,
to her, but knowing, that again, it wasn't too late to reset.
right,
Yeah. The word reset became my friend. So, and just understanding that, oh, I can reset at any time, that I need to. But
yeah,
from, with the Asian background, sometimes we are so hard on
yeah.
ourselves that we don't even allow ourselves to reset.
Yeah, there's like very little room for grace and
Yes.
it's like zero margin for error, right? And that's for me, that's been a a difficult journey because it's always easier for me to extend grace to other people. But when it comes to myself, it's like I hold myself to these standards that if I fall short of them, including like parenting, right? It's like you just feel, or for me, I just feel this incredible guilt. And it's like, oh, I am like unredeemable. But that's totally not the
Yes.
case. Like I need to also make reset and recalibrate like a regular, exercise and just a regular word in my vocabulary. That's really good.
Yes. Yeah. And so, one technique, since we're on the topic of extending grace to other people, it is very difficult for Asians to connect to themselves, right? To ourselves. We are very disconnected from self because we are so focused on others. And it's a conditioned
Mm,
belief. I think in the Philippines, so I came here when I was 15
mm,
years old. So I feel like, yes, in the Philippines, but also just, being an immigrant, right? Like my parents coming here, being on survival mode
yeah,
disconnects us even more
right,
from the sense of self
right.
and from our body. So if you're listening or watching, this and you're thinking, well, where do I start? That's one way to start is if your if your maybe your child or your best friend or someone that's really close to you came to you with a problem, right? What would you tell them?
Mm,
How would you encourage them? And then one of the things that I tell, people is write those things down on an index card or a post-it note as if you're telling yourself. So the disconnect the we're closing the gap by, treating ourselves as if we would treat our best friend
yeah,
or our child. Like what would you tell them? And then like see how that resonates, although sometimes that's the hardest is to accept our own words for ourselves.
yeah, no, for sure. And there's such a power there though with words. I think this whole idea of like self-talk, whether negative or positive,
Yes.
right? We need to really watch out. Because our body absorbs that, our mind absorbs that, and it doesn't take much, like if you keep conditioning it to accept the negative self-talk or to accept the positive self-talk, it's like a world of a difference, right? And so, yeah, I love that, recognizing the power of the word of words over ourselves. Yeah, it's a
Yes.
great tip.
Yes. Yeah. And if you can't do it for yourself, just think, what would I say,
Mm,
right, to my daughter or my son? Or what would I say to my best friend or someone who asked for my advice?
yeah,
And then try to translate it
yeah,
for yourself.
yeah. No, that's so good. That's good. Yeah, so I guess now we'll move into parents helping to support their children's mental health, right? I think once we recognize what triggers ourselves, um, or things that perhaps we need to kind of be mindful of for ourselves, and I think it's easier, or we're better serving those around us, especially our kids. And um, as moms with kids, um it's definitely, again, like there's so many layers of complexity, and like kind of like an onion, right? Like layers to peel back. But what are some just tried and true like best practices for parents um to incorporate in their homes to cultivate that space where it's like, okay, I'm allowing my kids to feel all of the feelings, right? And of course, it's different at every age.
Yes.
But we all want them to feel safe. We all want them to understand that their feelings are valid. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so how do we begin to kind of foster that at home? Because like you said, it's like important to understand the individual within their different respective environments. And I think as parents, as the heads of the household, that responsibility falls on us, right? Like we model um whatever, like our kids are always watching us, right? And so um we want to be able to model healthy behaviors to them, whether that's in the space of mental health or other arenas. So I'd love to hear some of the best practices that you can suggest to our parents and
Yeah.
the viewers who are tuning in to this. Um, yeah.
For younger kids, what would be helpful would be like, books,
Mm.
with illustrations that are colorful and things like that, and just having story time with them. I will send you, Jocelyn, some of the authors
Yeah.
that I like, and then we can send it to the
Yes.
email list of the registrants, the people that registered.
That would be
Um, yeah, an example, Julia Cook is another is one author that I have so much respect. She has written so many books on emotions
mm,
and Worry Machine, and I forgot the other titles, but those are really good just to open up the conversation. It doesn't have to be intense, especially for the younger ones, and just kind of like getting to know where they're at and where you're at. I do suggest whatever books you bring into your family, you want to study those first, right? And just kind of like think about how you would present it to your kids. Those are always good conversation
yeah.
starters.
Yeah, that's a great way. I think especially for so my kids are young, 6 and 3, and they love reading right now, and especially they're looking
Yes.
for really vivid pictures and illustrations. So I will definitely be doing that with them. Yeah, because when I think about for my kids, I feel like I don't want to label them, but they definitely are um I hate the word like highly sensitive child.
Oh, I
I
don't
don't know,
get
like
that.
I don't know if I like that, but
Okay.
um but they are like very attuned to like, certain situations or like if someone perceives them a certain way, I think they're very sensitive to that. Um I feel like their, like, emotional intelligence is very high. But yeah, like, helping them to walk through that, right? And to, um, again, a lot of times it's, like, at the inconvenience of the parents or that situation, right? Like, if we're at, in public, like in the store, that's really when the meltdowns happen in front of other people. But that's really just, like, addressing our own triggers, right, as the parents. Yeah, like, so helping them to navigate that, right? Like, and then being a source of like calm and a safe sort
Yes,
of haven for our kids, I think is really important for me and for my husband, where it's like if you can't come to us with how you're truly feeling, then I mean, it can be a scary world out there, right? Like you don't know who you can trust and things like that. And obviously we want them to be able to have that environment at home. That's just something that's really important for us. So yeah, what about
definitely.
for like, middle high school kids?
Yes.
What can we do, yeah, to help support them?
Yeah, absolutely. Communicate, right, with them. Listen, turn on your listening ear at all times, right? Because when it comes to that age, there has to be a lot of listening that comes in. I forgot to do my brain diagram, but I am I able to share my
Yeah,
screen?
yeah, I think you should be able to share.
Okay, let me see. Let me just, um, oh, um, but it is important for the adolescents,
Mm.
during the adolescent years for them to be able to express themselves in a
Ah,
safe, non-judgment,
right.
a judgment-free zone.
Yeah.
Because the neuroscience is that, the brain is still developing, right, until the age of 25. That's when it matures. But the window from 12 to 18 and then 18 to 24, like those are crucial
Mhm.
years. And when the brain is still developing, that means that you can expect that the emotional part of the brain is really in charge during
Mm,
even in the younger ages too, right?
yeah.
Until the age of 25, the the prefrontal cortex isn't in charge. And the prefrontal cortex is for the executive functioning. And, you can get into that as well, but that means that they're not able to access the logical side of the brain as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the driving force is the emotions. And so that's really important to keep in
Yeah.
mind.
That's so good. And I love that you touched upon just the actual like science behind it. Because I think um a lot of the discourse with mental health, sometimes it's like so feelings based, but there's an actual science behind,
Yeah.
all of this that we're talking about. And um, so just again, like we don't know what we don't know. And now, like when we talk about, yeah, like child development and taking into account all the different stages, right? And all the different
Yes.
ages where they hit certain milestones or like even the development of the brain, that gives us a better awareness and understanding of how to talk to them and how to
Yes.
support them. Yeah, so that's really
Yes. So their brain's developing, and so they're not able to access the logical side as much as we do. But here's the interesting part is that when we reach, by the time that we are 35 years old and older, we are, as parents now, um, we are now sort of like operating, that was the word, operating from habitual
Mm,
pre-programmed conditioned beliefs.
yeah.
That means that a lot of, I think 95%, science shows that 95% of the time we're just reacting and responding out of habit.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless we pause and we develop more self-awareness, right? And then we become more aware of like, oh wait, I probably shouldn't have responded in that way.
Mhm.
Or I probably should have approached it in that way. So that's where the push and pull comes in with the parent-child relationship.
Yeah. And it's so interesting when we think about, again, being from like an Asian immigrant household. Yeah, our parents were in survival mode, right? Like, I can't even imagine immigrating to a country where you don't speak the language, you're trying to like assimilate, but you're
Yeah,
trying to like raise a family and everything's so foreign and so new. And you're in survival mode for pretty much like your entire like adult life, right? Until your kids
right.
are like independent. That they never had the luxury of becoming aware of like, childhood traumas or things that they carried that they um gave or passed on to us, right? And it's like I have to think about that when I think about, certain conversations that I've had with my parents or certain traumatic like childhood sort of situations that I was put in that um just like I think this happened once I became a mom, it was like, okay, it's hard. It's hard and my parents just did the best that they could, right? All of our parents did
Yes.
and to extend them grace as well.
Yes.
And but then also feel empowered that we are in a different, place because of what they sacrificed and everything that they did. We are here now and we do have the tools, the resources to bring that awareness to ourselves and for our kids and for our family. And it's really about like, okay, what are we going to do next with that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly empowering. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of, I guess, share that with
Yeah.
everybody.
No, thank you for bringing up too that we extend grace to our parents. That is so true. We're not like blaming them, right? Like we're not
Right.
saying that they're at fault. We are in a place now that we can look at our children and say, oh, they're very different from
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
and what can we do about it, right? Are we just now going to operate on
Mm,
based on
yeah.
traditions, right, or conditioned beliefs, as I've said?
Yeah.
or are we gonna, or do we want to change
Yes.
some things?
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. It is empowering. And we're setting,
Yes.
I guess, the tone for generations to come too, right? Like not just for our children, but it's part of the legacy that we pass on.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. I read the other day that we are creating a legacy of wellness, right, for our children. Because in a world where we can pass down anything from disease to
yeah.
trauma
Yeah.
and stress, we can also choose to pass down something different,
Yeah.
whether it's happiness and wellness,
Right.
and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Empowering. Really good.
Um, and I had shared with Jocelyn that when my daughter transitioned to high school, she's now going into 11th. She just finished 10th grade, but in ninth grade, she had like this culture shock, for lack of a better word, but she experienced high levels of anxiety to the point that, we had offered to take her out of school so she can homeschool. I think it was just really too much
Yeah.
for her all at once. She was taking rigorous classes, and we offered tutoring. They've had tutoring before. We are a family that has no shame in like asking for help, and
No, of course.
so yeah, we brought in whatever she needed in middle school to succeed, right? And so we told her, do you need virtual school and things like that? And she said, and we sat down with her and we said, your mental health is more important than anything else. And I think that I, to me, that was one of the missing pieces growing up, is that we didn't have communication in our family. So it's like, nothing was said otherwise. Meaning, like, I think my parents in the end, told us, like, they were proud of us, but in the process, we didn't really hear anything else. Does that make sense? Like,
No, it definitely does.
okay, I'm glad I
Really?
internalized a lot of the
Yeah.
responsibilities and burden, but no one said that it was not my responsibility.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And I think a lot of times those expectations are sometimes they're imagined, but like we feel it,
Yes.
like
But
as
no one's saying anything.
right, right. And when I think about communication in my own family, right, like my the family that I grew up in, yeah, it was non-existent from my parents. And for them, they were very demanding. I mean, with my dad being, like the one who started A plus, like everyone expected me to, or at least I thought everyone expected me to get like a
Yeah.
1600 on my SAT, which I didn't, to get into an Ivy League school, which I also didn't. It just became a
Uh,
lot, right? And that was so
yes.
long ago. And now, like, there's just tremendous pressure and stress in terms of getting into college, where paired with, never really recovering from COVID, it's just been really difficult to watch and heartbreaking as well. And um, I think a big piece is parent education, right? Like
Mm,
giving our parents, or not our parents, but the parents around us, just the tools and the resources that they need. Because I feel like also people are just like running this rat race, right? And we live
yes.
in an age where, like I was saying before, just like stress and work and anxiety, it's almost as if like we glorify those things. And if you're not
It's true.
constantly grinding, then, that's like tied to your self-worth or your net worth, right? It's like, okay, you need to constantly be grinding. Otherwise, you're not being productive or you're not contributing to society, right? And it's like, why don't we like take a moment and think about that for a second? Like, we're not robots, right?
Yeah.
We were never created to be robots. And it's just like it's such a toxic thing that and it's hard to break down because it's not something that just became that just like it started now, right? Like it's been a thing since like our parents, since even before then. It's like you always worked hard,
Yeah.
no matter what happened. Like, which I think, of course, there's value to that, but like
Yes.
working hard to the like working yourself to the bone, like that's just all agree that that's not healthy, right? And that's not good for anyone. And there's only so much that our bodies and our spirits and our souls can take where there will come a breaking point, right? And we don't
Yes.
want to get to that breaking point, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our families as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me see if I can share.
yeah.
So here's a more specific. Um,
Mm,
so the I like to have acronyms. Sometimes it helps me remember
yeah, totally.
things. So this is the acronym ENGAGE. Um, encourage a dialogue with your children, right? For the younger ones, you can still definitely your kids best. And so even just an exchange of ideas and things like that, that's considered a dialogue. Where the two of you are, communicating. It's a two-way street, right? Not just um, one person dominating
Mhm.
the time and everything. And then encouraging a dialogue can mean like, okay, like, tell me more, right? And not shutting down any ideas. Even if you think, quote unquote, the idea is ridiculous,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like my son told us that he wants to be a YouTuber. So we're like, okay, she's 10. So we're like, oh, what does that mean? Like, what do you see yourself like doing? Like even just encourage, because this is before I forget, when we say like they can't access the logical side of their brain, this is it. When you encourage a dialogue, you are strengthening the executive functioning,
Yep.
right? Because they can hear themselves, they can process.
Yes.
So that is going to be very important. Nurture their abilities, and that means like really getting to know them, what
Mm,
their strengths are, what their passions are, by
yeah.
asking them, by observing them, giving them suggestions, letting them try things, and then um, of course depending on your depending on their age, then you can kind of have that negotiation room to where if they sign up for things, right? I know that's also something that needs to be considered and things like that. But in nurturing their abilities, it's okay to communicate it's okay to have expectations. It's
Yeah.
okay to have rules. By the way, children at any age, they thrive in structure
Yes.
and systems.
Yeah.
And but the problem is the lack of follow through.
Mm,
So make sure that you can follow through as parents, right? And make sure that you communicate your expectations. You communicate your rules to your children. Don't assume that they already know because,
mhm.
right? Like we're a product of the assuming.
Yes. Yes. Totally.
Yeah. And so just communicate, right? But first, you have to identify what the rules are for yourself and what your expectations are. There are three markers. And I'll include this in the notes so you can have it as well, but you'll have the slides too. But there are three markers, if I can remember them correctly, for anxiety. We know that when these three markers are present in the family, then there's a higher risk for
Mm,
children to feel anxious.
okay.
But again, it's just a framework. It doesn't mean that it happens to everyone. The first one is when caregivers view the world as a dangerous place.
Mm,
So
okay.
caregivers who tell their children like constantly like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, or right, like things like that, or shouldn't go
Uh,
there.
uh,
um, so that's a marker. The other marker is when they are critical of themselves and others. So the caregiver is critical of themselves, this negative self-talk
mm,
that you're talking about, that children observe in their parents.
yep,
So that can increase the risk of anxiety. And then also critical of their kids, right? Like when they're criticizing every single thing and not really noticing the positive, that can increase anxiety. And the third one is the high standards, impossibly high standards in the home environment can also increase anxiety. If, again, if you feel like, oh, I probably fall in one of these areas, it's okay, right? And now you can kind of go back and say, well, what do I want my kids to experience in our home? And what do I want to experience for myself as a parent?
yeah. I'm like, I have all three markers from like my child. Yeah, but it's so interesting because I can remember like maybe a couple times at previous jobs where I actually had like a panic attack, but that had like never happened before. And so I was like,
Before,
what's
yeah.
going on? Like I can't breathe, right? And
Oh,
um it was because I was so stressed out. Like we had this really big event that we were putting on and it was like a high stakes situation. And I was traveling to California and I was like, oh my, like in the plane, I was like, as we were landing, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. Like, what's happening? And yeah, I mean, looking back, it's like our bodies
absolutely.
internalize so much. And
Yes.
because like it didn't get you this time, it doesn't mean that like it's not going to like accumulate if you don't address it, right? I think we always it's almost like we're always like pushing the boundary, right? Like pushing the threshold. It's like, oh, I
Yeah.
can handle this, I can, what's another commitment? Like I can do this. I can just keep, saying yes to all of the things and
I know.
overcommitting myself because that's also glorified too, right? Like I know people start talking about boundaries now, but actually a lot of my friends and even, some of the other like women I've met in like high level, executive positions, they all mention that they have a hard time saying no to things and they always
Right.
restrict themselves. Um, why does that happen? Do you know? I don't know. It's like I'm like thinking of kind of processing out loud, but like I think that's like a common thing, especially in Asian women. Is it because we prioritize like we really want to give our best to like everyone else?
Yeah,
Or
I
we're
think
just like
so.
constantly serving. Yeah.
Right. The people pleasing,
Yes.
right? Keeping the peace,
Yeah.
saving face, right? Like, and we don't want to shame anyone or like offend anyone or like be in that position that we feel shame.
Yeah.
So, all of those things, I think, in combination
Uh,
makes it difficult to say no.
yeah.
And habits.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think about like fear of like disappointment too. Um, because the Asian society is so collective, right? It's like
Yes.
actions or our words. It doesn't just affect us, it affects our families, it affects everyone around us. So like fear of, oh my gosh, like if I don't, get it right the first time, I'm gonna let someone down. And that just to me, like I can't handle that, right?
Right.
So it's like undoing all of those things,
Undoing. Yeah.
and
Yes.
unlearning some of those unhealthy habits.
Yes. And then, get to know your children's needs, ask for their opinions. I know that is very anti-Asian because seen but not heard,
Yes.
right? But
Yeah.
again, when we ask for their opinions, that doesn't mean they have the last say. It just
Right.
means that like
Yeah.
we
We're bringing them into
value,
the conversation,
yes,
not just
and
like,
we validate.
right. Yeah.
We acknowledge their presence, we validate them. And who knows, like sometimes they have, also great suggestions for the family and things like that. Get relevant, meaning like get in front of, what's happening in their world right now. Because in that age, like especially in the teen years, the
Yeah.
peer
Yeah.
opinions are going to be very important.
Yeah.
And if we're not encouraging the dialogue at home, they're for sure having a dialogue with someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so like for me, I'm raising a Gen Z and a Gen Alpha. So their lingo is so I don't understand. It
Yeah.
confuses me. Do you see that in your students?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually subscribe to this one organization. One of their missions is to give parents, they shoot out newsletters all the time. And it's giving parents like, okay, this is what's popular in terms of the lingo right now amongst Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids so that you can understand. And I'm like, this is so needed because
Yes,
things are just constantly changing, right? And even with like the apps that the kids use these days, I'm like, if we as parents like are not understanding how these apps work or, the algorithm or whatnot, then we can't even begin to understand like what's going on there. And
that's
so
true.
many of the kids, like they're always on their phones now. And I'm like, yeah, in order to really get relevant, right, we have to kind of get down to their level and
Yes,
see
in that
things
way, yeah.
through their lenses or through their perspectives and be kind of savvy with like what they're saying, with what they're doing these days.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
And
lot.
that's true. Like the apps that they're using, the movies that they're watching, shows that they're watching, try to get to know what those things are. Yeah. And of course, enjoy your conversations with your children. I included that because it's also important to
Yeah,
note the happy moments that we have with our
right,
children,
right.
that it is allowed that we can be happy and we can laugh with them and we can it doesn't always have to be intense conversations or dialogues.
Yeah, yeah, and that's important. Like watching your child grow up into their own person, right? That should be enjoyable. Yeah,
Yes, that's true.
and getting to see what they're passionate about, what they want to give to the world, right? I think everyone has a seat at the table, and as
Yeah,
parents, it's kind of our responsibility to kind of guide them through like on their individual path, right? And even for your two kids, um, it's like every kid is different, even if they're from the same family,
absolutely.
right? And so to recognize, okay, the way that I parent and support my older child is going to be different than the way I support my younger child,
Yes.
which I think is also something that the previous generation didn't really have like that luxury of really figuring out. They did the best because
Yes.
they were in survival mode. So
Yep.
yeah, yeah,
And I think we can, like what you said earlier too, like, we definitely can thank our parents for everything, that they did for us. And now we can kind of pause and say, like, okay, am I now in survival mode, right? Like, or does it stop with me
yes,
so that I can, continue to move forward? And again, thanking, the older generation, previous generations that came before me, and now what do I now, want to do for
right,
my children?
yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And
Mm.
so for the parents who are listening, here are some just tips that you can start with as you prioritize, right, your mental health. One is recognizing what depletes your energy and what replenishes you. So, and again, that's goes back to like knowing your limits and maybe practicing. By the way, that's another word to get to know is practice. Nothing is going to change overnight, for sure. So just practicing saying no, practicing, knowing what's important, practicing the dialogues with your children, definitely a good place to start, but also knowing what replenishes you, how you recharge, what are some things that bring you happiness, what are some things that you can do to pour back into your cup, so to speak.
Um,
Um, Identify the ways that stress or anxiety are impacting you personally, because we all experience anxiety, we all experience stress and sadness and what have you, but it is a very individual
yeah,
thing.
yes.
Yeah, so, and then name your needs, right? What do I need right now? What does my family need? Because again, we can see what other people are doing with their families. We can learn from them, but we are not them, and we have our own personal needs, and so does our children, so does our family. And
Yeah.
then nurturing your needs. So this is kind of like self-care, if you will, but I like the word nurture that because I think the word self-care is so
Mm,
um, overused that it loses its meaning. I mean, it is very, very important, but just identify and define what self-care means, for you and how you would nurture, your own needs. So
yeah,
these are just like starting points.
these are so good. I also agree that nurture is a great word. I know self-care, I'm like, I think it is very overused, especially recently. And I heard from one of the I was there was like a panel of these women who were in very high stress, jobs, like high stakes. A lot falls onto their shoulders each day, um, based upon like their decisions and things like that. And they were talking about self-care and how, it's important to make sure that the care um, techniques or whatever, you do, it's really serving you. So it's
That's a
not
good
something that's just like
one.
superficial, like, oh, I'm just gonna get like, yeah, again, like that's totally fine to get your nails done or to, get a massage. Those are all
Yes.
great. But then like at the end of the day, like if I ask myself, like, do I feel like less stressed, right? Like, do I feel relaxed, right? For me, like some of those things they don't address, they don't nurture the need. And like one thing that I've begun to do because it's like so helpful for me, because like for me, my thoughts, they kind of just run wild, right? And then it's usually at like 2 a.m. that I'm like, I need to sleep. I need to
Yeah.
sleep. But my mind is going crazy. And so I'll just do like a brain dump.
Yes.
And I'm like, at the end of the day, like I was able to accomplish ABC. I'm grateful, right? I think it's important to also practice gratitude. And then at the same
Yes.
time, it's like, okay, for tomorrow or like whatever's on my mind, I'll just like literally dump it. Like I'll either type it out into like a Google Doc or I'll like write it in a journal. And then that way it's kind of like you're emptying out your brain, right? Like just that act in and of itself, I think is really helpful because then it's no longer just
Absolutely.
like kind of sitting in the ether that is your brain. Or
Yes.
you're just like constantly left to, your own thoughts and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is making me more and more anxious, like just thinking about it versus just like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna release that by writing it down and that's it. Like I'll take care of that tomorrow. Um, and I find
Yeah.
that, yeah, is like so helpful to do that type of thing versus like just, again, like getting my nails done or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm gonna go back to the symptoms.
Mm,
Um, so I chose anxiety, but you
Mm,
know, this is how
how it
we would
exists. Yeah.
break down. But I also have one that is a longer list. Um, so here are some of the symptoms, the physical symptoms: butterflies in the stomach, chest pain, and things like that, and definitely tension when we feel like we're so tensed. And then this is how it sounds like. Why did I say that? Right? And then, but just ruminating,
Yeah.
what we call rumination, which is just like repeating, or replaying
Right.
scenarios in our mind, and then basically just, going through the worst case scenario. And then more symptoms would be like nail biting, leg shaking, trembling, irritability again. So these would be some of the signs to look for, but also, and again, you'll get a copy of this, but um, this is not by any means even comprehensive, but just to
Yeah.
start off, if you're like, okay, what signs do I need to, kind of look for? Again, it doesn't mean that there is a disorder, but it just warrants that, okay, I may have to look a little deeper, right? You can use this for teens, and you can also, use it for yourself, like frequent crying, overly negative attitude, isolation, um, forgetfulness, all of those things, and just significant changes in routine.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this one I will also send more for adults, for parents, right? Often feel overwhelmed by daily tasks. I find it difficult to relax and unwind. This is probably like 95% of
Oh,
patients.
yeah.
Yes.
So
But
true.
it takes practice, right? Just
Uh,
just practice, and it is difficult to get used to or break habits, but it can be done. It's just a matter of like, what do I need or what do I want,
mm,
for myself. And that's all I have for the slides.
thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
So with that, I guess we will move into Q&A. There were a
I,
couple of questions that we received from um, a couple of actually my teachers, but they weren't able to join us tonight. But since we are recording this session,
yes.
we'll just go ahead and answer those. So one question was really interesting. She asks, what are the roots of the stoicism and stigma around mental health
Mm,
challenges in many Asian cultures? So this kind of goes into a little bit of history. And I was like thinking
yeah,
about this too. Like um, I wonder why. Where did this come from?
I know. I think that the emphasis on like work ethics, right? Hard work and community, and the collective society. And maybe we are more attuned to like what is happening with other people, and like we're ready to help other people, and we can sense, that word sense, when something is not right with, our relationships and things like that, but we're just not able to kind of translate it, to ourselves almost. Um, and I think the stigma is just the emphasis also on like saving face and the shame,
Yeah,
and being passed down from generation to generation. Like, oh, if we have problems, we need to talk it over as a family first. Although we're
right.
not talking about it. So it just kind of like
Yeah.
gets prolonged, and yeah.
It's so interesting when I think back to my parents and even the way that they framed, like if we had seen someone's, relative or someone else like struggle with depression, which we did, right? Um, my dad would attribute it to like not having a strong mind. It was almost as if like you can will yourself to have
Oh,
good
that's a
mental
good
health.
one.
Like,
Yeah.
that is like, I don't think that's scientifically like, there's something going
Yeah.
on in terms of chemical imbalance, right? When we think about depression.
True. True.
Um, but he would always like frame it like that. And so like growing up around that, it would be like, okay, if you feel sad, then you are weak. Have a
Yes.
weak mind.
Mind.
And that is your fault, and you need to somehow get yourself out of it. Um, which obviously like is not an accurate depiction of how mental health works and how the brain works. But
Right.
um, and that I'm sure was like transferred over to him from his parents and like, predecessors and all of that. But yeah, the whole idea of like, God forbid you show any weakness, right? What would that say not just about yourself, but like about your parents and then about your
Yeah.
family, right? And the lineage. And it's like, um, so my dad, he came from a farming family. And so he would work the fields like when he was young, which is so crazy because I'm like, we look at 2 generations later and here we are, right? It's like so different.
Right.
So
Yes.
he was very poor and he was the only one in his family, he's one of six, who was able to go to college, was able to even come here, get a college degree, get a master's, start a business. Like he definitely, lived and breathed the American dream from like just like, the extreme, like the extreme American dream, right? Um, but yeah, just bringing over a lot of those cultural, like the mindset, right? Of like, I just
Absolutely.
need to keep going and I just need to like, no matter what happens, like I can work myself out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even for myself, like my parents, when I told them that I was gonna do social work, they were like, okay, like they
Yeah.
didn't really understand why. And then
Yeah.
when I told them that I was gonna get licensed to become a therapist and go into private practice, that's when they were like, why?
Yeah.
They didn't understand what I was doing. But later on, I think well, I don't know if they really did understand, but when I would post things on social media, they would reshare it, which, I felt supported, but I don't know that they really know what I do.
Right, right. It's almost too like, I think some of our, like, there's no language for like some of the things that we talk about, right? Like on a
Yes,
practical level. And I
that's
appreciate,
true.
so like, a lot of my friends are into Korean dramas. And I think there was like one Korean drama that came out in the past couple years where the protagonist is a lawyer and she's autistic. And I think that's like one of
Oh,
the
yes, I
first,
saw that
oh,
one.
you
Yeah.
did? That's like one of the first, K-dramas to ever portray um yeah, to ever have
Oh,
like a protagonist that struggled with mental health challenges in that sort of in the entertainment industry. That's like the first time that they ever did that, which is definitely needed and is great because I mean we see in Asian countries right now just like the young adults and the next generation, they're struggling. Like the suicide rates are just skyrocketing. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and it's so heartbreaking because I'm like, are they talking about I mean, I don't know. Like I'm not living there now, but it's like these types of conversations need to be had and to just
Yes.
like that feeling of just isolation, and hopelessness, right? I think the
Right.
hopelessness piece is like, oh, like it just really breaks my heart. And I'm like, there's a lot of work to be done. It obviously starts with
Absolutely.
ourselves, but um, yeah, I think it's just so important. I think we're at a really critical point right now. Um,
Yeah.
to really be able to support our children and the next generation.
Yes.
We have a question from Michelle. Awesome. How do you explain to your parents that giving kids options and asking for their opinions matter. Mm.
How do you explain it to your parents?
Yeah, to your parents, that giving kids options.
I mean, do you have to explain it to your parents?
To my Asian parents. Okay, okay,
Oh,
got it.
yeah.
To the parents that I serve or that we serve. That's a great question. Yeah. Um,
How have you, yeah, approached that?
yeah.
I'm thinking too
So
from my personal.
I kind of like work backwards, right? I think a lot of, again, like the parents, they come in because they're like, I need to get my kids into college, right? And that's like the immediate need. And then I kind of dig deeper and I get to know both the student and the parent. And I'm like, okay, let's like backtrack because there's just so much going on right now that like, yes, college and careers are the eventual goal, which are all good things, but that's like, let's talk about what your child is facing right now and how you can support your child. And I think I ask them, I'm like, what do you want to see your kid? Like, okay, so I asked them, I'm like, do you want your child to eventually be independent? And of course, the answer is always like, yes, right? And I'm like, what does that look like for you? Right? What does that look like for you? Is it sitting in a high position at a corporation, getting a six, seven figure salary? Is that seeing them thrive and be, just good in all facets of life? Like, what does that look like? And I think for them, there's this idea of like, okay, I think I should be I think my kids should be making millions, and that's the end goal. That's like the definition of success, right? So again, it's like about the parent education, kind of unlearning some of those misconceptions and really asking them the hard questions because I don't think anybody's like asked them
Mm,
those questions before. And I'm like, if you truly, if you truly want your kids to get from where they are now to point B, whatever that final destination is, like you have to understand that your child, and a lot of times these are teens that we're talking about, right? And so like
right.
there's such a fractured relationship already with the parent that it's almost like I'm kind of doing therapy as well. And I have this
I
like
know.
like weird thing where it's like I understand what the parents are coming from because they remind me of my own parent, right? And then I also understand what the kids are kind of facing because they remind me of me when I was their age. Um, and and I see a huge disconnect between what the parents want for their kids versus what the kids want for themselves. And so just like encouraging that dialogue, like you were saying, Joy, like beginning to like foster those conversations, which I'm convinced they never had prior to like coming to A plus, even though it's like they came here for like
Yes.
SAT prep, but they definitely walked away with much more than that.
Uh, That's
Um, yeah,
awesome.
it's just like it's so important though, right? It's not just the academic, it's not just like the worldly success. Like we want all of our kids to do well in all parts of their lives. And so Michelle, it's like, yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. And I think it's different every time I sit down with a parent and a student because um the things that they're struggling with may be different or like perhaps like one parent I can tell that they're not receptive yet to like what's going on or they don't want to really face the reality of what their kid is going through. Um and it really is like therapy. Now that I think about it, because a lot of times like parents are also like, I don't know what to do with my kid, like they're not listening, and I just let them kind of talk and vent
Mm-hmm.
because I realize that they need that space too.
Yeah,
And sometimes I'm like, you know what, like I feel like right now my time is just to, or my role is just to listen and not provide any sort of advice unless they're asking for it, right?
oh, that's
Um,
good.
and then other times it's like, well, I if like we've had that sort of relationship and built that trust and rapport, and I feel like I have permission to speak to their lives, then I will tell parents like, perhaps you need to rethink the way that you're speaking with your child, or perhaps you need to speak with your child, right? Like take that first step,
Wow.
really engage them in conversation and be able to view your child as a person and not just like project like your dreams and your, whatever you wish to accomplish that you couldn't accomplish like through your child because that's not what we want. Like, right? Like we want them to be able to forge their own paths. Um, and so I don't know if I'm answering your question, Michelle, but that's kind of the way that I handle these conversations with, my parents and my students and um to really just make sure that they walk away with um some tools in their tool belt and it does go above and beyond education. And so it's funny when people come in, they're like, what's different between you guys and Princeton Review or like you and Kaplan? And I'm like, I don't even know where to start with that. Like like yes, you come in for all of the academic, but hopefully you walk away like feeling known and feeling seen, whether you're
Yes.
a parent or a teacher or a student. And
Yeah.
like that's the environment that I really want to cultivate at A plus and with every person that comes through our doors. So,
Yeah. No, I agree. That is so good. And really just like, because this is a person that we're talking about, right?
yeah.
And I think that's what sets you apart too, is because you treat your teachers, your students, and the families like actual people. And so you encourage that dialogue. Yeah. And also like uh just to add like two things, right? It helps children if we're going to go to the scientific part. It helps them develop their brain when you ask for their opinions, when you um consider, what they are trying to tell you and things like that. And then secondly, maybe approaching it with curiosity, like if, the parents, right, the Asian parents are like, well, why do you even care about your children's, opinions? Um, I would even probably ask, like, well, what do you mean by that, right? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, I would want to, before I can answer, right? And say anything is to like I would like to know like do they mean that that I shouldn't? Do they mean that my child's opinion doesn't matter? Like I would also have that conversation
Mm,
with the parents and ask them, what exactly are
yeah.
they trying to drive at?
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, it
Yeah.
reminds me of even just a conversation I had yesterday. The mom is definitely a first generation immigrant. She is younger. Both she and her husband work a lot, and so it's really the grandparents. So it's like her parents that are kind of raising her kids, which adds another layer, right? And
Mm,
um, like the parents are pretty much absent. And they came in, so it was her, she brought her son in, who's a teenager. He's finishing up his sophomore year, so he's going to be a junior, just like your daughter. Um, and it was just interesting, like observing the dynamic. And I asked a couple questions to her son, and I was like, um, okay, like what do you want to do in the future? Right? Like just really simple, or like what are you interested in? He was like,
interesting.
I I don't know. I just want to be alone. Like I don't enjoy, being with other people.
Anything.
And I was yeah. And I
Oh,
was like, what school do you want to eventually go to? Right? Or like trying to get something like elicit like some response.
yes.
And then he was like, whatever my mom wants me to do, or whatever, like wherever she wants me to go.
Oh,
I was like, man, like I can already tell from his response that there is an absence of dialogue in the home, right? And then I'm like talking to my husband, I'm like, it feels just insurmountable sometimes. Like, I really want to help these kids and I want them to discover what their, interests are, what their strengths are, and also support them and encourage them. Like, hey, like go after it. Go after it,
Yeah.
right? Like I give you permission to go after it. Don't go after something that you think your parents want you to achieve or want you to go after. Like, what are you interested in? And I think some of our students right now, like, they can't even vocalize or articulate that because that thought has never even like occurred to them. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it's like because there was no encouragement from the parents, or perhaps again, like just the lack of the parental presence in the household, right? And unfortunately, this is like becoming really common,
Definitely.
where, both parents,
Wow.
of course, were working, but there's no sort of household um, dialogue or any sort of like environment that's encouraging like the growth of the child.
Yeah.
I'm like, if that's like the norm, then I guess my question is like, how do we begin to kind of break that down, right? And I feel like I can only
Mm.
do so much if like the students coming to A plus to take a class like once a week, right? For three
Yes.
hours. I can try my best to ensure that for those 3 hours, he is seen, he is heard, he's taken care of, he's making progress academically. But I'm not going to be following him home, right? I'm not going to be able
Right.
to replicate at A plus
Right.
in their home. Like I'm not going to be able to replicate that. And that's also not my role, right? Like I don't want to be a second mom to you. So like how do we begin to like I don't know, like
Wow.
do you know what I mean? Like I don't know how do
Yes.
we support them um in the way that they need, and I think it goes back to like we need to have this idea that we are all in this together. That
Absolutely.
it's not just it doesn't all fall on teachers, right? It can't. It doesn't all fall on parents, right?
Right.
Students are, generally speaking, unless you're homeschooling, they're being sent out to, somewhere else, whether that's private or public school for 8 hours a day. But they do come home to you, right? And so I think we all need to be on the same page in terms of like, okay, we need to prioritize certain things. We need to have non-negotiables. And when things
Yes.
start coming up, symptoms start manifesting, like we need to have strategies and mechanisms in place to help the student cope and get through that. And then the eventual like goal is to kind of, I don't want to say set them free, but it's like they get to a point where they've established all of these tools
Mastered.
in their tool belt. They've been through all of these things, it's built their character, it's built resilience, and they can go off into the world and we can be like, okay, we know that we did a good job. We did what we could,
Right.
right? And now they are independent and we have full confidence that no matter what happens, they can take care of themselves at the end of the day. And I think that's like the end goal, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
love that.
so yeah, it's definitely a heavy, heavy, thing right now. But again, like I think it's all about community. It is all about community.
Absolutely. And working together. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
so
sure.
I guess with that, we will end here. And thank you, Michelle, for staying till the end.
Yes. Thank
I think there
you.
were a lot of people who couldn't make it today. I'm like just looking at my phone, there's some texts.
Oh,
Yeah, but I'm glad that we recorded this session. And we will be sending out a lot of resources. And again, if there's any way that Joy or myself can support your children, support your students, support you, please, please
absolutely.
reach out. And I don't think this will be the last time that we have something like this.
Yeah.
Joy, I feel like there's so much to talk about. We
I
haven't touched on
know.
like social media or like devices and all of those things, which can be, a source of anxiety in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So Thank you again so much, Joy. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jocelyn.
to all of our
And
viewers.
thank you, Michelle. Yes.
Yeah. And we will, yeah, talk to you guys soon. Right.
Bye.